Hi, I'm
Unique
Melinda
title.
Kucsera, your indie fantasy author, and welcome back to Fantasy Lore and More. And today we have Laura Nelson, who's joining me to talk about her book, The Heir of Svartån. So let's get into it. And let's find out why she likes to name things with weird names. Since that was mentioned right before we started the intro. So, welcome, Laura.
Thank you. This is my first podcast that I've ever been on, so hopefully I'm not too weird. But yeah, so Heir of Svartån is my first official novel that I wrote and published, and it is about a 17-year-old girl who lives in Fargo, North Dakota, and she is not she doesn't have a great home life. She's not in the greatest situation. She lives with her mother's boyfriend, and oddly enough, her best friend. And the way that she kind of escapes her not so great life is by playing video games with her best friend. And her best friend and her, they love these games. And then one day, as they're playing them, a freak accident happens. I'm not going to say what the freak accident is, but a freak accident happens. And the next thing they know, they are in the real world of Loishara. It's not a video game, it's an actual fantasy world. And when Ina, the main character, gets there, um, she finds out that her long lost father was actually a ruler in this land, and he recently died. And so she's his heir, and she has to go up against people who want his title. And there's a whole bunch of a, not as much political intrigue as further in the series, but you start to get some political intrigue in the first book as she's having to fight for this title and also figure out whether or not this place, this fantasy world, is actually a place she can call home, whether or not it's as awesome as she made it out to be in her head. And it's really fun. There's lots of dragons. She can see dead people, well, ghosts, and there's magic and a little bit of slow burn romance because I can't live without having just a little bit of that. So yeah, it's a fun YA fantasy, portal fantasy, um, that it's a fun way to escape. So that's my pitch. That's my blurb.
No, it sounds awesome. So, let's get into it. Let's hear an excerpt. Let's hear the characters in their own words. Where are you dropping us in? Are you taking us into the first chapter or somewhere else?
So I am dropping. This is the beginning of the second chapter. This is when she wakes up in the fantasy world, and she gets to have her I won't say wake up call, but she's like, what? Where am I? What's going on? So with that, I'll start.
I imagine that can be
I
quite
woke
jarring.
I woke up to my face in a warm, fleshy, horizontal groove, and my arms stretched out above my head. It throbbed, and my wrists were bound together as I tried to pull them apart. Something rough was in my mouth, and I gagged on it as I tried to move. What the hell was going on? Shh, hold on a minute. Uncle, will you help me? A man's voice was quiet above me as I froze and got shifted around on his lap. I'm face down in someone's lap. Why was I in someone's lap? And why was I tied up? The gag in my mouth loosened as the two men untied it. They pushed me into a sitting position where I could see what was going on. I whimpered as I surveyed my surroundings. 5 men in bloodied armor stared at me wide-eyed as we sat facing each other on rough wooden boards inside a cold metal cage. A metal cage that was moving. A wagon. Outside the cage, 2 men sat with their backs to us, urging a couple of horses in front up the incline of the mountain that towered above us on one side, and keeping them from slipping off the path and into the valley on the other side. In front of me, my hands were tied, and instead of my normal winter gear, I wore a thick but worn and faded jacket over my torso and arms. My jeans were stiff and cold, barely keeping the wind from chilling me further. The young man, whose lap I'd been face down in, studied me for a moment and whispered, "What's your name?" His wrists were still bound, and I wondered how he'd been able to get my gag off. He seemed familiar, but I couldn't remember from where. A strange sense of safety and trust emanated from him as he sat there. His gaze wasn't uncomfortable or leering, and I got the impression he was just as curious about me as I was about him. He was built burly, like a wrestler or a football player, seemingly unfazed by the bitter cold weather around us. with long brown hair tied in the back. He also had neatly trimmed facial hair, where most of the guys I knew were clean shaven. Either way, it was a good look on him, and I bit the inside of my lip to keep from smiling. Now was not the time to go soft over an attractive stranger. Instead, I focused on my surroundings and on his question. Both my curiosity and nervousness grew as I tried to figure out what had happened. Ina. I leaned back, but that made me lean into another man on my right. He grumbled and glared at me out of the one eye that wasn't bruised and swollen shut. I stiffened up, back into my sitting position, trying to suppress or at least hide the panic that swelled up inside of me. This scene was uncomfortably familiar, despite the young man in front of me, but I couldn't figure out why. You know what? The uncle of the young man also spoke in a soft tone, gesturing to the two cart drivers in front of us with his bound hands. Is that your full name? No. I kept my voice quiet as well. It's just what I go by. Why do you want to know my full name? The younger man's uncle replied, You look an awful lot like a dear friend of ours. He always talked about having a daughter, but most of us thought it was just a story. Then you show up. I stared at the old man, trying to gauge his intentions. I hated giving out my full name. Maya Ingmar Svanung. It's a weird name, I know. The uncle grinned, revealing a mouthful of crooked teeth. No, it's a fine name, and it means our friend wasn't a liar. He turned to the young man sitting next to me. Following his gaze, I saw the young man grinning at me. So you're the new Thane of Spartan? He said. No. My heart stopped for a moment as I stared at him. This wasn't real. This had to be a dream. I was dreaming about Loishara again. That was it. I couldn't be inside a video game. I tried to remember what brought me here. Nothing. My last memory was being in my room with Maddie. Maddie? Where the hell was Maddie? Where the hell was I? There was laughter behind me. I turned to see a dark-haired man with a thick, bushy beard smirking at me, just like my mother. The sides of his head were shaven, but the top was braided or matted, with two bauble-decorated strands framing his bloodied and scarred face. His stare unnerved me. I think you may have terrified her, Haldrick. The young man whose laugh I'd woken up in, Haldrick, glared at the man as I glanced between the two. She'll be fine, Gustav. Gustav's smirk turned into a scowl. It won't matter. We're all dead anyway, or we will be soon. I turned back to Haldrick in alarm. He shook his head. We can still call on the dragons. Looking back to see his reaction, it surprised me to see Gustav's expression darken. There's only 5 of us here, and her. He growled and gestured at me. And she's not even a real Thane. Not yet, anyway. If she is Ingmar's heir, that is. Haldrick's uncle cleared his throat and leaned forward to stare unblinkingly at Gustav. We don't need all the Thanes to call for a dragon's aid. It's just easier that way. I'm surprised you don't clamor for rescue. Unless you're expecting something else? Gustav scowled but said nothing, instead turning his attention to the road behind us. The man behind me groaned again. What are the chances we'll survive this, Haldrick? They slaughtered almost all of my men today. And if the High King is dead... Haldrick turned back to me. Are you willing to help me? He gestured to the rest of the group. Us? Summon a dragon? I have no idea what to do. My voice came out sounding smaller than even I expected. You just have to get the soldiers' attention once we stop. How you do it, I don't care. I didn't want to die, not in my actual life or in this video game dream world, so I nodded. Haldrick focused on the others and took a deep breath. You all still with me? 3 of the men bowed their heads in agreement, and after a moment Gustav huffed and bobbed his head as well. The caged wagon bumped along a rocky road, making a bit of straw fall out. I crinkled my nose at the pungent smell around me, wondering if it came from the men or something else. The lands below us were snowy, barren, and rocky, while pine trees towered from the side of the mountain above us, just like a real-life version of Loishara. I tried to find a familiar landmark from the games. No luck. Haldrick's conversation with me played out almost identical to the new game's introduction. I twisted around again to see a small valley beneath us. Smoke rose from it, but that wasn't necessarily a good sign. A village might be down there with people tending to their everyday lives, or it could be Brain. The Bloodnar won't make this easy on us, will they? I turned around to see Haldrick leaning towards me. He shifted so his pant leg and mine touched. Much to my surprise, he was still warm despite the weather. Am I really in Loishara? I whispered. I still believed this was a dream, but it felt different. I never felt cold or other physical sensations in my dreams. Your father told you of this place before he returned here? I shook my head. No, my friend Maddie, her father told her stories about Loishara and its history. She'd share them with me, so I'm not sure if this is a dream, because this is the type of dream I would have. Haldrick nodded. I don't believe this is a dream. This world seems real to me. It seemed real to me too, almost too real. I had wished for Loishara to be real, but I hadn't expected to fall into the game scenario. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine the rope around my wrists disappearing. Then I pulled my wrists apart. Nothing. What are you trying to do? I'm an idiot. Sometimes I can manipulate my dreams. I figured that if this was a dream, I could make the ropes disappear. Haldrick laughed. I wish it was that easy. I stared at the rope around my wrists. This wasn't a dream. The thought hit me hard and my throat tightened as I squeaked out. Are we going to die? Not if I can help it. He hesitated. But they've already killed the High King and his family, including all the Aethelings, his heirs. And he paused as he looked up at me from his hands. If they execute us Thanes, Loishar won't have anyone to protect it, save the dragons. Dragons? I turned to him as the thought sunk in. Like real, fire-breathing, screeching dragons. I thought back to my dream and the games. Haldrick frowned. Do they not have dragons in... He faced his uncle. Keldon, where did my father and Ingmar go again? Someplace far to go? In the north? The uncle nodded. That's what your father said, before he left. A snowy flat place is what Ingmar reported when he came back. Though your father never went to Fartigo. Ingmar said he went west, to a sea castle. I narrowed my eyes in confusion. Fartigo? Haldrick's uncle continued. It's a city near land, I suppose. Your father, Ingmar, told us it was in the ancient land of the Dagoda. Skilled warriors, horsemen and archers, but foreigners wielding powerful weapons ran them out. He sighed, the wrinkles around his eyes making him look ancient. Much like the Bloodnar are doing here. I gasped once I realized what they were talking about. It's not Fartigo. It's Fargo, North Dakota, where I was born and raised. But there aren't any sea castles near us. North Dakota is landlocked. The Dakota Sioux were fierce warriors, but yeah, foreigners took over. I didn't mention that the foreigners resembled people from Loishara more than not. Haldrick sighed. It's too bad you don't know where the sea castle is. If you did, I'd go there and see what the allure was. To make my father abandon his people and spend his last years there. His uncle shook his head. Don't dwell on the past, Haldrick. Your father was not happy here, not after your mother's death, even with the dragons at his side. Haldrick leaned back against the bars of the wagon and exhaled. His breath materialized as soon as it hit the surrounding air. I suppose you're right, not that it matters now. He turned his head as a small camp came into view. The wind whipped the bright-colored flags atop the tents. I could make out the image of a garish but familiar red and yellow sun on each one. A Bloodnar war camp. The ruthless bad guys from the games were now real. My chest tightened and my stomach churned as I wondered whether they were as brutal in the game as the game made them out to be. You ready? I hesitated to answer. I wasn't a warrior, but this was real. I wouldn't respawn or wake up if I died here. I guess. Haldrick smiled grimly. Just keep the soldiers' attention. Fight them, swear at them, whatever. We'll take care of the rest. As soon as the cart stopped, my panic threatened to overwhelm me as my heart raced and I grew lightheaded, trying to think of what to do once they dragged me out of the cart. How would I cause a distraction? Was I going to make things worse? I struggled to push away the looming threat of death and failure as two of the soldiers chuckled at me crudely, and others removed the men from the wagon. They weren't from my world, but the gestures were similar enough. As I lurched off the cart, one soldier grabbed my arm and breast. It still ached from where Robert had last hit me a few days prior to all of this, and the indignation rose inside my chest. Pardon me, pretty little thing. The soldier chuckled and grabbed my chin, pulling my face too close for comfort. He sounded like Robert, and my insides curled up with anger. Without thinking, I pulled back and jabbed him in the throat with my elbow. Don't touch me like that. My heart started to racing as he tumbled backwards. Everyone's attention focused on me as I struggled to pull away. I hated being the center of attention, but this was me causing a scene. Another soldier took me by the arm and squeezed my butt with his free hand, causing me to gasp in pain. Touch you like what? All you Lowy Sharons, you whores. Spread 'em high, spread 'em wide. His friends laughed harder. I twisted around and stepped back before swinging my hands at him. He dodged them and smirked, entertained by my antics. My fury at him and the fact that I was in a very uncomfortable situation fueled me. Shut up! I kicked him in the stomach and wobbled back. I wasn't strong enough to knock him down, but he stumbled back a few paces and into a fellow soldier. You filthy wench! He lunged at me and I stepped aside, raising my arms again and clipping him in the chin. He dropped to his backside as someone else seized me and twisted me around to face him. Egged on by the adrenaline coursing through my body and my ability to hold my own against these soldiers, I spat on the next man without a second thought. And as I stared at him, though, his attire gave away his position as a leader among the Bloodnar soldiers, and I froze. Enough. Spit dribbled down his nose and face as the man's grasp on my arm tightened until it was painful. You can be the first to perish. I plan to give that honor to your friend Dragon Breath, but I'll be taking all of your heads to my king myself anyway, so you can die first. He kicked me with the flat of his boot, and I stumbled to my knees next to a low square stone stained dark with dried blood. A nearby soldier yanked me around, arranging my head on the stone so that my neck was in the middle, facing the other Thanes. A humming sound started from where they stood. I writhed in vain as a soldier pressed my head into the stone harder. Hot tears rolled down across my face, and I hoped that I'd bought Haldrick enough time. A hand grasped my head beneath my jawbone, pressing on old bruises my mother had given me, and pulling it up to reveal my neck. The soldier behind me rasped out with a deep, gravelly voice. Looks like we weren't the only ones after your throat. I froze as I saw the large, muscular executioner walk out from a nearby tent, surveying us prisoners. A moment passed before he checked his blade. He shifted to me, grinning with a mouth near void of teeth, and walked up behind me and out of my sight. My gut churned with fear as soon as I lost sight of him. I'm gonna die. My mind went blind with panic as I jerked against the soldier's grasp again, and my sight blurred with tears. Then the Thanes began to chant. It was a song I knew, a plea to Teneleth. The soldiers began murmuring, grabbing for their swords. The Thanes ignored them. Even the soldier holding my head loosened his grip. Pulled in by the sound, I started singing along, keeping in tune with them and speaking the words as the song grew louder and louder. Silence! Silence them, men! The commander pulled out his blade and pointed it at Haldrick's throat. Both the soldier holding me and the executioner ran towards the Thanes. Then the first screech came. Our song finished, and I heard Haldrick's voice above the ensuing fray. Cover your ears, Ina! With no one holding me to the stone, I twisted off of it and onto my back. I was faster now than I was in the game, but despite plugging my ears as best I could, I heard a muffled but louder screech as a massive, familiar-looking dragon flew overhead. I watched as it took a breath above us, and I braced for the next screech. The ground shook from the sound as I shut my eyes, curling up as tight as I could. Then silence before a feminine voice spoke. Welcome home, little one. The surrounding noises returned, this time including screaming and gurgling. I fought the urge to heave from the vibrations of the screeching and held my breath until everything was silent. Silent except for the plodding of feet in my direction. Keep your eyes closed, Dina. Haldrick sounded calmer now, but I did as he said, until he stood me up and started slicing the ropes from my wrists. I opened one eye to catch him grinning. Hearing a dragon's war cry can be a life-altering experience. How did you recognize the summoning song? I stared at the surrounding scene, just now seeing the carnage. All of the Bloodnar lay dead, despite no outward injuries, except for blood dripping from various orifices. However, the air above their bodies shimmered unnaturally. The urge to vomit came quick and violent. Haldrick turned me to the side as I began dry heaving. I was shaking and weak by the time it stopped. Told you to keep your eyes closed. His voice was soft, his words more of a statement of fact than chastisement. He guided me to where the other men stood, cutting the ropes off of each other's wrists. Haldrick's uncle smiled at me. You are your father's daughter, for sure, and you sing the summoning song perfectly. Did your father teach it to you as a child? I believe you singing it brought the dragon to our aid more quickly. I groaned as I tried to keep my balance, not having the energy to explain the real reason I could sing the song. Haldrick tightened his arm around my shoulders and said, I need to find Hrimfax and determine if any of the horses here are worth taking. He steered me over to another young man who had gathered up 6 agitated horses, trying to soothe them. Once he had calmed them enough, he turned to us and smiled. We're lucky. These are war horses, and good ones too. They were just jittery. Primfax shrugged. Any animal would be around dragons, but we'll get home without delay. He then cocked his head and stared as if gauging me, before glancing back at Haldrick. Does she know how to ride? I shook my head, and Haldrick replied, Even if she could, I think she'll need a hot meal and some riding and some rest before riding. Today's been eventful for her. It's been memorable for all of us. Primfrax grabbed the reins of two of the stallions, guiding them over to Haldrick, who tied one to another. Why weren't the horses affected by the dragon's war cry? Despite still feeling weak, my curiosity prevailed. Primfrax grinned. Legend has it that the horses and dragons are related. So while they get jittery, they have no ill effects from dragons. He nuzzled one horse, and it seemed to return the sentiment, which makes me happy. I can't bear to see horses suffer. They're smart animals, you know. Haldrick put his hand on my shoulder, and I let him help me up onto one of the horses. He turned to Primfax and said, Thank you, cousin. Your gift with horses has always been an asset. Primfax shrugged again and said, You could say the same for your gift. Either way, are you two headed back to Andrader? Or... Haldrick shook his head as he got up on the horse behind me and wrapped a large blanket around the two of us. Svartån, Ina needs to visit her Thane lands sooner rather than later. I twisted around wide-eyed as Haldrick's cousin gawked at us, and then turned to him. So the rumors were true? Haldrick nodded. Yes, and now it's time for Ina to take her father's place. So that was the snippet.
Oh, wow. That was a lot happened. Wow. So the men who were also in there, they were like men from like, I guess, who served her father, or
Well, they
that.
were other things. So like her father's peers.
Oh, okay. So okay, I wasn't like, I've heard the word Thane, but I like only vaguely remember like what it actually means.
It's an old Anglo-Saxon word. So this is another fun thing that I do, and kind of ties into why I have really unique place names and stuff. I tend to dive deep into like old languages, whether it's Anglo-Saxon, Old Norse, Latin, all that kind of stuff, and dive into the really nitty-gritty, nuancy stuff. And so a thane, like in our world, was just like a ruler of a local area. And so I took that and put that in my world as sort of the ruler of a I'm trying to think of, well, a thane land. Loishara has 12 thane lands, and the ruler of Loishara is the High King. And then below him is 12 other rulers for their individual areas. I think in another book later on in the series, Ina is talking to another character and is talking about how there's 50 states in the US. And the person's like, wait, there's 50 Thane lands. How do they all get along? And Ina's like, they don't really. But that's kind of the best analogy of that. A Thane land is kind of like a state. And then the Thane is the person who's in charge of the Thane land.
Gotcha. So they're all in charge of their own little
section.
area. Yeah. Okay. So I guess if in later books she's still in Loishara.
I'm taking, so fun fact, when I was coming up with the words, the fantasy words, then I basically went to Google Translate and was like, all right, I'm going to pick out basically Norwegian, Swedish, Finnish, Danish, like a whole bunch of languages from that area. And I just smashed them together and was like, what looks cool? So this is very much a fantasy language that does not make sense in our world. So
but they do, like linguistically, like there are some, because there's on the eastern side of Europe. There's the Slavic,
Yeah. Mhm.
and I know Norwegian in them, they're not Slavic. They're something different language group.
Yeah.
But there is, at least among the Slavic countries, a lot of similarities. And I know, but between
Mhm.
like Russian and Ukrainian, that there's some commonality, and I've heard that there's some commonality, not a lot, between like Finnish and other languages up there, only because like
Finnish,
geographically
yeah.
they're close together and people are kind of roaming around. So you see a thing that you don't have a word for in your language, but they have a word for it in another language. You're like, oh, we call it
Yep.
this, and over time that may get merged into your language, like you find English words in other languages,
Mhm.
because they're like, why, we're not going to create a word for this computer, we're just going to borrow something that
Exactly, yeah.
like, so we're
So
all using the same sort of word for it. No, so
so
that's
I'm
cool. So
I'm
I think you
yeah.
can mash that together. But if you've mentioned in later books that she's still there, so I'm guessing she doesn't leave the video game and go back.
No, there is one point in the 3rd book in the series where she gets kicked back to our world, but she doesn't stay in our world because she's grown roots in Loishara, and Loishara, um, becomes kind of her home, and she doesn't really have any ties to Fargo anymore.
I mean, there's lack of indoor plumbing and central
There's
heating,
magic.
air condition. I mean, yeah, you've got magic and dragons, but like, who among us would trade flushing toilets and central heating and air conditioning for a fire or opening a window?
So,
I mean, I guess if
an
if if she's in like a Norse analog kind of place, they have probably Norse weather, but they do get
mhm,
summer. It does get hot over there. I follow
yeah,
a Swedish travel blogger, and you know right now she's on Svalbard, which is all the way up close to the
mhm,
North Pole, and like it was 50 degrees there, and she was saying that in Sweden, like where her sister lives, it was like 80 or 90 at that point. I don't remember what she said Celsius wise.
yeah,
I'm not awesome at the Celsius Fahrenheit in thing. And so yeah, so are or is she in the North Dakota analog for like
mhm.
where Loey Shar, like let's talk about
It depends
like
on what part of Loishara
yeah.
you're in.
Okay.
So, and that is something that, is part has been part of my world building, is the northern part of
Sure.
Loishara is more like Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, but as you go farther south, there are parts of it that are, a lot warmer. There's a certain one of the Fanelands in the south actually has bayous similar to Louisiana. So there is a very diverse geography in Loishara. So it really depends on where you're at. Um, Something else like so, even though I like doing sort of the fantasy stuff, I also kind of like having a little bit of, I don't say hard science, but figuring out the physics of the
Mhm.
fantasy world.
I mean, you
And
have to.
so, yeah,
I write epic fantasy like you do, and you totally like, as much as we just want to play with the magic and the dragons and all the fun stuff. We do have to sit down sometimes and figure out, okay, how's this going to work this world?
mhm,
What kind of weather are they going to have? Like, so that when you're in a scene and you need some weather, you're like, okay, I've figured out what sort of weather they can have. So here's
yeah,
my choices for the weather they can have today. Because sometimes
and yeah,
you need like weather to play a role in what's going on, or reason that they don't go outside or whatever,
yeah.
because you need them inside for something or whatever.
And so, like, so I have done research as to, how would people like back in the Middle Ages or even, the not early modern, that's later, but like Viking era, um, how would they have stayed warm? What would they have done in like castles and hovels, wherever they were living? And so I've kind of played around with that. So they're able to keep their houses comfortable, and especially if you're a ruler, you're going to have some nice digs. Um, so I kind of looking to be like, okay, how hard and difficult am I going to make my characters' lives
I mean,
when they're
that's the
not going
question,
on
because
adventure?
you gotta make, where she's living in Lowy Shar comfortable enough that giving up modern conveniences is no big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also touch into um, throughout the series the fact that uh, she has a lot of trauma and bad memories from Fargo, and that does affect people where they're like, okay, this place that I lived in my entire life, it may have, all these great perks, but whenever I see this place, whenever I'm here, all I can think about are the horrible things that happened to me. So it doesn't matter how nice of a place it is. I associate negative memories with this place,
Yeah.
whereas somewhere else they're going to have more positive memories, and that's kind of what happens to her. And I also, when it comes to like the magic and like a little bit of the hard science, I kind of treat the magic in this world as um, a bit like science in our world. And so later on in Heir of Svartån, you get to meet Maddie. And Maddie's another character that I absolutely love. And she is very much, she prefers the magic over like sword fighting and that kind of stuff. And
Mhm.
so a lot of the
I mean,
modern
who wouldn't?
conveniences that we have, yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, if
And
I had a
so,
choice between a sword and some magic, I know what I would choose.
exactly, fireballs all day.
Oh, yeah, all day long. Magical shields, you can have your sword, but if I've got a shield that you can't get through, like, guess who's gonna win the fight? It ain't gonna be you, because by the time
Exactly.
I drop that I can hold it until you're completely exhausted and then just walk over and smack you, you know?
Yep. And so Maddie is much more into the magic side. Ah, my dragon fell. I have my little dragon
Yeah, I
guy.
saw.
He's actually I purchased him, and I have a bigger one who her leg broke because one of my children were playing on her. Um, but yeah, those are my little mascots. So, but
I've seen
I'll let
them
Pavo rest.
I've seen them at the Renaissance Fair. They have the little thing that you squeeze, you can open their mouth.
Hmm.
Some of them are more
This is a
articulated.
this is a fun little spiky guy. But yeah, so with the magic, Maddie is very much like, how does the magic work? She's like, I'm not just going to hand wave it. I want to know exactly how it works. And so she kind of treats it like a science.
Mm,
Um, and so there are certain things that, especially, it isn't touched on too much in Ina's series, but I do plan on having a series for Maddie as well, where Maddie really gets into the nitty gritty of how does this magic work? Because in her mind, it is a science, and if she can figure out how the magic works, how the science works, then she's like, I can make my life better. I can make everyone else's lives better. I can figure out all the things that I take for granted, indoor plumbing,
mhm.
air conditioning, heating. I can figure out how to make it more efficient through magic as opposed to science, because they're one and the same in her mind. I love Maddie. Maddie's so much fun. And
So I'm
that's part of
guessing
one of the or go ahead.
so I'm guessing that Ina's like all the fine with the hand waving, like, give me the
She's just like,
dragons. It
yeah,
works, and
she
that's
likes
all
the
I need to
dragons.
know.
Yeah, pretty much. She's like, I don't need to know the nitty-gritty scientific paper on how this spell works. Just make it work.
Yeah.
Tell me what are the words I need to say? What's the hand gestures I need to do? What's the bauble that I need to wear in order to make the magic work? Whereas Maddie's like, I need to know the details.
Yeah, why does it work? And why is it
Mhm.
this specific way makes it work versus, like, one variation to it? But it sounds like
Yep.
that Maddie doesn't have like, Ina's, the daughter of a Thane, so she's got political things she needs to be taking care of, and Maddie, I'm guessing, doesn't. So Maddie was her friend from North Dakota who came here. Was
Yeah.
she related to somebody? Did she get grabbed by accident and decide, "Hey, I was crashing at my friend's, and if she's gonna stay there, it'd be kinda weird if I went back." Like, what is
So
her deal?
so Maddie is actually very tied into the world of Loishara too, and later on in the series, she actually does have to have some. She becomes a Thane, Um, so, uh, like we were talking earlier, I'm okay
Mm,
with giving spoilers because they're fun, and then the
they are.
spoilers won't necessarily give away the big plot, the major plot line. But when they Ina and Haldrick end up going back to the Thane's estate in Svarden, and there they meet up with Maddie. And Maddie, uh, so back in Fargo, Maddie and Ina were best friends. Their fathers were best friends. And that was how Maddie ended up being living with Ina, is because both of her parents passed away by the time she was 14, and
Oh.
she didn't really have any family members. And so her dad's like, in his will, and her mother never changed it, was like, um, okay, if both of us die, then Maddie's gonna go live with uh, Svante, who is Maddie's father, Svante's best friend and his wife. Um, Unfortunately, there's a failure to communicate things over the years, and Ingmar never had the chance to return back to Fargo. And so by the time Maddie's mother passed away, it's Svante's not there, or Svante's passed away. Maddie's mother has passed away. Ingmar is still in Loishara. And so Maddie is now living with Ina and her mother and the mother's boyfriend. But Maddie has a little perk. I don't want to say perk. Maybe perk's the right word. So Maddie's father, Svante, when he came to our world, he found out about video games. And he was like, you know what? People would love all of the stories and lore of Loishara. And he figured out, I'm going to make a video game based off of the world that I'm from and all the fantasy and the magic, and people are going to eat this up. And they did. And so he ended up making a like an indie video game that people just loved. And then that got bought out by a bigger video game company, and it has become, in their world, this big, huge franchise that makes tons of money. And so Maddie actually has a very nice inheritance. And this is talked about a little bit in the first chapter. She's very wealthy. She has a living stipend, and that's part of the reason that Ina's mother allows her to live with them, because Ina's mother also gets a stipend to take care of Maddie. Um, but yeah, so Maddie, uh, she she's actually very familiar with the world of Loishar from her father's like game notes and everything. But she, like Ina, thought that Loishar was just like this. It was just a game, and maybe it was based off of her dad's, childhood and stories from when he was growing up. And then she gets thrown into the actual world of Loishara, and she has her own storyline. And I actually have a short story that I've drafted it. I need to finish the story I'm writing now, and then start her story of what happened to her when she first arrived in Loishara and how she reacted to it. Because this is a spoiler, she's actually Haldrick's half sister. They don't know that
Oh.
until a few days after they're all at the Thane estate. And Ina has a dream where she sees her father, and he's like, "Hey, give this to Maddie, because Svante would be really mad if I didn't give her this. If she didn't get this pendant that is symbolic of her being one of the Thane's children, being part of the sort of noble class."
Mm-hmm.
And so the thing with these pendants is that they are etched with whatever Thane land you're connected to. And so Maddie also kind of was getting clues, and I touch upon this in her story, but she mentions it to Ina after the big reveal of her and Haldrick being half siblings. Is that she's like, I was pretty sure that Haldrick and I were related because my dad mentioned having a son from a previous marriage, and Haldrick looks like our dad. But I wasn't going to say anything because I don't know
Yeah.
how problematic that might be, and we just
Yeah.
met. But then when Ina gives her the pendant and Haldrich sees that that Maddie is connected to Andrader and that she has this pendant that means that she is part of the noble class and everything.
She can now
He
deal with
kind of
politics too.
exactly, which is as soon as she realizes that, she's like, oh shit. Because I have for a lot of the main characters who come from our world
Mhm.
to Loishara, they have their reasons for why they like the game so much. For Ina, she loved the games because she could be powerful, strong, confident, everything she's not in real life.
Yeah.
She gets to be, the hero.
Mhm.
And for Maddie, she liked that she could just be anonymous because in our world, everyone knew her as, the daughter of the man who created the Loishara games. And so everyone's like, oh, cool. What perks? They want all the latest and greatest. And she's like, I don't care. Like, I want to be anonymous. I don't want everyone staring at me and being like, oh, you're Maddie Gunvald. And so,
But
that's
her
the thing that she
being
liked about the
related,
games.
yeah, her being
Yeah.
one of the thing's children is not gonna make her anonymous. So you have to
Exactly.
let
And
go
she's
of
like,
that.
yeah, so that is something that when I expand her story more, um, that she has to deal with the fact that she just can't be anonymous because of who her father is, and she has to deal with that life. And then there's another character who doesn't pop up until the last two books in the series. Another one of Ina's friends who Henry's another fun character. But the reason that he likes the games is that he can be an adventurer and go out and help people, and he doesn't have to have all this responsibility. Because in Fargo, he's like the quarterback of the high school football team, and his dad's a big business person,
Mhm.
and he's supposed to follow in his father's footsteps. And in the games, he can just be a random adventurer going out slaying bad guys and rescuing people. And when he does get tossed into Loishara, uh, he kind of gets to do that, but he also has to deal still with the fact that both of his parents were uh, noble, elite, political individuals. But yeah, all the games for Ina, Maddie, and Henry were all ways for them to escape the parts of life that they were just like, this is too overwhelming for me. And
So
so that's kind of a theme throughout the whole
yeah.
thing.
So like okay, so Ina's dad
Mhm.
came to Fargo and met her mother, or her mother came from
Her
Loishara?
mother is no, her mom is from Fargo. Her mom has lived in Fargo her entire life.
Gotcha. That's
Um,
what I thought.
does not believe in the magic or anything. Her mom is, I don't know how much I'm allowed to swear. Um,
She doesn't sound like she
but
sounds like a piece of work.
she is. She's a narcissist and very manipulative, very abusive. And um, in the first chapter, you get to see a interaction between her and Ina where she accuses Ina of stealing stuff and chews her out, and yeah, just not a lovely person. And then you get to see her again in book three when Ina and Maddie and Haldrich get tossed into Fargo, and how I I won't spoil that part, but yes, there's some fun action scenes in Fargo, and you get to see a little bit of karma for Ina's mother in how she's treated not only her daughter but other people throughout time. But yeah, Ina's mother
So
is a piece of work, to put it nicely.
yeah. Okay. So if you go, so these, so the two fathers who were from
Hmm.
Loishara, and they came to
Hmm.
Fargo, like, w- I
Well,
mean, they
one
had to
one
have culture
in what
shock.
yes, they had culture shock, but they were also just like, hey, this is a cool new place. Let's just, check it
That's a
out.
lot to figure
And
out with the technology and stuff, especially the father
yeah,
creating the video game, going from I'm living in a medieval society to and swinging swords around to I'm going to write code.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
that's quite a jump. That must have taken a while.
Yeah, so the both of them, from the time that they leave Loishara to the time that that Svante dies is about a 10-year period. And but both of them are very smart individuals, and uh Svante doesn't end up in Fargo. He actually ends up in Sea Castle, which is actually Seattle. And both of them are able to, in their respective places, kind of uh uh connect with other people. And so with Svante, he connects with a lot of like people who were, creating their own little games, their little indie games and that kind of stuff. That's the group that he ends up falling in with. And so that's how he's able to pick up on this stuff so quickly. And the way that he sees code and creating video games and the stories, initially he doesn't actually write the code. It is the people that he's met. He's the storyteller. He's the one who
Mm.
creates the world, who writes the world. But then as time goes on, if you're hanging with software people, you're going to start to learn about how to do software. Um, but yeah, um, that's sort of his. And I will say I do a little bit of hand waving with that more than with the fantasy world. But yeah, he that's how he ends up uh, um, being in Seattle and creating the game. And also, Maddie's mother is not ignorant of software either. And so, while she's not one of the main programmers, uh, she's still part of that group of people who, when he first comes to Seattle, who he ends up interacting with and
Right.
becoming friends with and everything. So that's my
That's
story, and
wild.
I'm sticking to it.
That's wild. Are you ever gonna write that story of them coming and they're and creating the game and
Possibly. I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility. It is one of the backstories that I'm just like, I probably will have to touch on that. Um, how did they end up? How did they adapt to Fargo or Seattle versus medieval Scandinavia-esque culture?
yeah, and how
And
did
how did
Ina's father end up with a narcissist who sounds like, I mean, unless he was a narcissist too. I don't and
he
because he sounds
so
like a good guy, like to end up with someone who would mistreat his child, like that's I mean, you must have met her in
let's
the
just
depths of
say that
culture shock and clung to the first warm body.
yeah, yeah. There's also something that a lot of narcissists will do when they first meet someone. It's called love bombing. And so I absolutely can see Ina's mother love bombing uh, Ingmar and him thinking, oh, wow, this is a really nice lady, and, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of times, narcissists, they'll love bomb until they marry the individual. And then after they get married, then their true colors start to show. And that's how I see it with Ina's mother, is that before being married to Ingmar, she's like, oh, I love you so much. You're the most amazing man in the world. Da, da, da. And then as soon as they get married, she's like, I hate you and I hate this life, and just a 180.
But
Um,
like he'd have
yeah.
to have money or something she wanted. And if he just came over here from nowhere, like you how are you going to get a job when you don't have a degree? How are like you're like the only jobs you'd be getting are things that are not going to be paying well enough for a narcissist to be paying any interest in you.
If the narcissist is interested in money, sometimes narcissists are interested in other stuff. Um, I will say that is something that I'm going to have to flesh out in the future.
Yeah, because
Um,
I'm curious. Because like most narcissists are they're after like money, prestige, and if he's coming from another world and only spending 10 years here and getting
mhm.
a daughter out of it, doesn't sound like that's not a lot of time to meet her and like it had to be magic, man.
Well,
Their
I mean,
meeting
I will
had to
say
be like fireworks and like
I will say that I could see him coming in kind of inadvertently being a Prince Charming to her, where because he's able to fight, he's able to defend himself, and he's easy on the eyes. That, he probably comes in when she's in a particularly vulnerable situation and is just like, "Hey, I'm gonna help." And she's like, "This guy. He may not have money, he may not he may be a random new person, but I can work with this. I can manipulate this situation to my benefit." So, but that's something that I'm gonna have to flesh out more. I will be perfectly
Oh,
honest
I
and say that
see.
Ina's
She could see him as a work in progress, that
yes,
he could go far with the right woman behind him and the right motivation.
exactly, and she's gonna be that right woman. And then, uh, about 5 years after, um yeah, about 5 years after Ina is born, so about 10 years after he's arrived, that's when Svante dies. And part of the magic and the lore and the, death rites, um, Ingmar knows that he has to take Svante's body back to Loishara through, through the magic. There is still a little bit of magic between our world and Loishara. Um, the dragons, that is another part of the world building lore. The dragons, they have the ability to shift between realms. And so both Svante and Ingmar have uh, dragon scales with them when they come to our world. And those dragon scales can act as a portal back to Loishara. The magic's a little dodgy. Um, they don't know exactly how it works. That is something that Ingmar has studied during his entire life. But they know that if you have a dragon scale on you, you can get from point A to point B. You can go, to and from. And so that is how. So when Svante dies, Ingmar takes his body back to Loishara so that it can have the proper death rites and proper burial and all that kind of stuff. But when he returns back to Loishara, they're in the middle of a full-fledged war. And so the High King tells Ingmar, "No more adventuring for you. You need to go fight." And so he's not able to come back. And all of a sudden, he's no longer this work in progress who Ina's mother can mold into what she wants to be. And she gets very, very angry, and she's like, "He's abandoned me," and there is a lot, because there's also another story that I've written about Ina when she's younger, and delves more into when she and Maddie first met.
Right, right.
Um, and so, yeah, I'm gonna have to flesh more of Ingmar and Sigyn, who is, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, Sigyn, their relationship and how they met. But um, I may have, when I was starting to write this story, may have loosely, um, and I say this for legal purposes, loosely based Ina's parents off of my own.
Oh,
So
okay. Hope they're not listening.
I don't think they don't. I don't think they listen to Spotify. If anyone's listening, it's probably my sisters. And if my sisters hear this, they're gonna be like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah."
So your
Not
dad
gonna
came
disagree.
from Loishara, or the Earth equivalent, and mom is a bit of a
He came from Utah.
narcissist.
Yeah,
Well,
my mother's.
that's like medieval Norse. I'm kidding.
Yeah,
No shade in Utah. I've never actually been to Utah, so it looks like
I
another
have.
world. Like the
It
pictures of
is.
like the parks and things, like it looks like a whole other world.
Yeah, it is. It is a beautiful place. I've lived in Utah. That's where I went to college, and I have a lot of world building that came from while I was living there. But no, my parents. Yes, my mother's a narcissist, not diagnosed, but the actions. You know, if it looks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, probably a duck kind of situation. Um, and my dad, they met in LA, and uh, I don't know too much about how they met. I just know that they met, and my mother literally said, because I guess they went on an activity together, or there was an activity to go to Disneyland. And she's like looking at the guys coming around the corner, and she's like, that guy. And she points out my dad, and she decided before he even knew who she was that he was the guy that she was going to use and be in a relationship with, and all that kind of stuff. So I absolutely know that I might not know necessarily the mechanics behind why a narcissist chooses their partner, but I know that just from family experience that they will just, be like, that person, that is the person that I'm going to woo and love bomb and mold and make into my person. And then if the person continues to do what they want them to do, becomes the person that they want to be, they'll stick with them. If not, they'll discard. And so with Ina and her parents, just through the fact of Svante dying and Ingmar having to take his body back, Saijin never actually had a chance to discard him or mold him into who she wanted him to be. And so she kind of feels very, very angry at the fact that she did not get what she wanted out of her partner. And she's going to take that out on her daughter. So
what is it like being the child of an undiagnosed narcissist? Like, how does, like, my mom's not a narcissist.
It's a
we have
roller
a
coaster
relationship, yeah, like, how does that, I can't, like, my brain is broken, like, trying to unpack that.
it is an emotional roller coaster. It definitely gives me a lot of story fodder, a lot of character development of, like, why do characters act a certain way? I think a lot of that comes from me growing up, me being like, why is my mother acting this way? Why are other adults acting this way? And not knowing. And so I'd have to, like, dig into that. That's probably also why I like personality tests. What makes people tick? And that makes for
That's
really good character
interesting.
development. Also, the reason why I really love portal fantasies, and I've always loved portal fantasies in one way or another, whether it is jumping into a completely different fantasy world or another series that I have that involves time travel. It's a form of portal fantasy. And with all of this, it's that if you're in a very crazy, toxic home life, it is very tempting to be able to have the idea of just, I can escape. I can escape this really horrible home life that I have. And that is really where Ina came from. Part of the inspiration for the story and for the character is I was that 17-year-old who, instead of video games, I escaped into books. I escaped into fantasy stories, and that's also why I tend to not necessarily read horror or the darker stuff, because I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I'm trying to escape that.
Yep. Same.
And so, yeah, that's without going too deep into, because I could most topics, if I'm very passionate about them, I could be talking on them for 2-3 hours. I jokingly call it the vortex.
Mm.
But that is something that I could talk very deeply on. But Cliff Notes, the Reader's Digest version of being the child of a narcissist, it is a roller coaster. Absolutely. Emotionally, mentally, all of that. Little silver lining is that I have great experience with, like, creating characters and that kind of stuff and figuring out what makes them tick.
Yeah,
So
no, that's cool. Like, I know a lot of cinnamon rolls, so I tend to write a lot of cinnamon rolls because it's what you know, you
Mhm.
know?
I love cinnamon roll characters. They're some of my favorite. Um, Especially the cinnamon rolls they are purposefully cinnamon rolls. Like they
Oh,
know
yeah,
that they're
they choose
capable of
it.
being scary, but they choose to be a cinnamon roll because I want to say I'm trying to remember what episode of Doctor Who it was. But there's an episode where, like, the bad guy is mocking the doctor and being like, "Oh, he's a good guy. He's not worth, he's not really going to do anything." And he's like, "No." He's like, "Good men don't need rule. And I hope I'm paraphrasing this the right way. He's like, good men, um, good men don't need rules. You don't want to find out why I have so many rules. And I love that. I love that vibe of someone who's a cinnamon roll because they know that they are capable of doing really bad things if you push them past that edge. That is actually Heldrick. Um, Even though you don't really see too much of that, you start to see it towards the later books in the series. But I have some stories. I have some like shorter stories. Some I don't know if it'd be considered like short stories or scenes, microfiction. It's sort of the written version of like when you go to the movies and you see those scenes after the credits. That kind of stuff. I
Oh,
have stuff
okay.
like that. I have one scene. So Haldrick is very much is a cinnamon roll. He loves and adores Ina, but he's also knows what it takes to be a good leader, and he has had to deal with some very brutal situations, fighting, warfare, that kind of stuff. There is a scene that I have that I actually plan on writing, and I plan on posting it on my subscription. I jumped onto Ream recently, and that's where I'm putting a lot of my new stuff.
Mm.
Um, but there's this scene in my head where Haldrick ends up uh, meeting up with some of the people who have caused Ina grief in her life, who are actually from Loishara. So, fun fact: Ina's mother's boyfriend is actually from Loishara, and he was sent by another thing to mess with Ina. That gets described more in the series. You find out more about that in the series.
Oh,
But
wow.
anyway, after book 3, uh, and this is hinted at in book 4, after book 3, the boyfriend gets tossed back into Loishara, and he gets captured by Haldrick and put in the dungeons. And I have this scene of Haldrick basically going down into the dungeons and being like, "You did all of these absolutely horrible things to Ina, and now you are going to have to pay the consequences. And I am going to personally make you pay the consequences." And, he ends up killing the guy. But that is sort of Haldrick. He's not he doesn't like to go and do dark things. He doesn't want to go and do violence. He wants peace. Like that is something throughout the series that he says, he's like, I want peace. I'm tired of fighting. But if you hit that point, if you hit that barrier with him, or you hurt his loved ones, he is not afraid to get nasty. It's just that's not his first thing that he'll do.
Mm.
So yeah, I like cinnamon rolls.
Yeah, so do I. So do I. My favorite is the overpowered cinnamon roll who's like knows that they have the power to do like to really just screw up lots of things, and they're like, no, I'm choosing to be a pacifist. I am choosing
Mm-hmm.
not to use all the power that I have because I could really destroy things, and I don't want to do that. And you
Yes,
don't want to
that
make
is.
me angry enough to lose control.
Yep, yep. Those are my favorite kind. So, but yeah, I've got not just in. I'm trying to focus on just on my Loishara characters, but in a lot of my writing, even outside of fantasy, I'll have those kinds of characters because I love it so much.
Yeah, no, they're fun. No, I have two of them. I like the strong women too. I have the strong sassy women and the strong, well, I don't know if she would count as sassy, but the other one is sassy. I have one that's she's more very hard line.
Yeah,
She
I think
knows
I've
what
got
she wants. If you get in her way or if you harm her people, she will get medieval on your butt.
Mm-hmm.
No qualms.
I have one character like that who's actually Heldrick's not direct cousin, but his cousin. Um, Come to find out, a lot of the leaders in Loishara are related in some way, shape, or form. But another soon to be Thane is one of Haldric's cousins, and she is the same way. She's very hardline, very tough. The only person that she is a softie for, there's two people that she's kind of a softie for. One is Haldric because she sees him as a brother. They grew up learning how to fight and all that kind of stuff. And she's also a big softie for her wife. And so there's once again, there's a story that I don't know when I'll have the time to write it, but a story about her. And this story takes place after the events of Ina's series, but her wife gets kidnapped by some bad guys who want to manipulate Haldric's cousin. And
that's dangerous.
yeah. And so on the one hand, so the funny thing is this cousin Alatar, she and Henry are actually cousins because of there's more stuff. I'm trying
That
not
must
to give
make
away
it
too many.
complicated when they're dating someone or they meet someone. You got to like go back and check the genealogy. Like, wait, are we related? How far back are we related? Can we get together, or do we have to part as friends?
Yeah. So talking about world building, I actually have so the noble class in Loishar are called the Abthenry, and they actually have the different houses, the different Thanelands actually have magic genealogy books, because early on they're just like, this is going to be complicated and this is going to get awkward and we don't want it to get too weird. And so you have these magic genealogy books, these annals, and that's actually where Haldric confirms that Maddie is his half sister. He goes and he checks the annals, or he has one of his servants check the annals.
So
And
they're
the servant,
updated by magic.
mm-hmm.
I have something similar. It's not in any of the
And
books yet.
so,
It's something I created
yeah,
long time ago that I just haven't been able to squeeze in anywhere.
yeah, it's fun. It's fun though to have that little bit of magic. Be like, okay, make sure no one does anything too weird. But yes, they do have those, and those annals are both how Ina is able to say, yes, I am actually the daughter of this, of my father, even though no one has met me, because the annals confirm it. And then that's how Haldric and Maddie know that they are siblings. But those annals are also used to make sure that you don't marry someone too close. And when Ina and Haldric, as their relationship increases, and she's like, okay, so you're the Thane of Andrader, and I'm now the Thane of Spartan. How closely are we related, honey? And he's like, don't worry about it. He's like, we're at least like fifth or sixth cousins at least. So don't worry about it. We can check. They do have a few ancestors in common, but that's like 300 or 400 years in the past. So I have created those family trees that are
just to make
for my
sure.
characters.
So you're not hooking
Yes,
people up who should not be hooking up.
yes. And I actually have for the same world another an elven race that are very they're connected to like fertility and plants, and like any place that they live becomes very lush with plant life and everything. But they also are very fertile in other ways. They have lots of children. And so, and they also have this connection to the planet itself, which is Cephas. And they have something similar where they will have these annals of who's related to who, because they have this belief in their own religious system that if you have two individuals who are too closely related, that the planet itself will not allow them to have children. And so that's their own. That's a completely different belief system. But that is their belief system. Is so if you have a couple who, within this elven society, who aren't able to have children, they have to first check, okay, is there a physical issue? Is there, something else? And then check the annals. Are they related? And if there's no physical issue, if there's no mental, if there's nothing, no reason why they shouldn't be able to have children, and then they check the annals and they are somehow related too closely, then they'll say, okay, Sethis has made the decision that these two aren't supposed to be having offspring together, and then they'll society says, okay, you can amicably go your separate ways. And there are cases of people in that society who that situation has happened to, and they do go, they're
Why don't
amicable.
they
They have
check that first before they get jiggy with it?
so they normally do. However, you're in any society, you're going to have bastards. You're going to have people who, and in this elven
Uh,
society, the bastards aren't necessarily recorded in their annals, at least correctly. And so then sometimes that can pop up if something has been incorrectly recorded. So I'm still working on that society's
yeah, I have a
their
similar
history, their
issue.
lore.
Yeah, with the bastards in the Book of Names.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I call mine is the Book of Names.
Yeah.
Totally not sexy name, but it's clear what it is. If it gave it a fancy name, then I'd have to remember what the heck it is. What if I call it the Book of Names? All right, there's names in it. Names and
Yeah.
relationships. But yeah, like if you are not acknowledged bastard, which my favorite cinnamon roll is, you're not in the
Mm-hmm.
Book of Names. So if you don't know who your parent, if you don't know who your daddy is, which he doesn't know, you
Mm-hmm.
can't check that. It's not going to tell you anything. But once you're acknowledged, you're in there. And then,
Yeah.
if you have titles or if there's anything that you legally would inherit or whatever, like once you're acknowledging you're in that book, that's, you automatically get all the things. Um, and
That's
you
very
can
cool. That's
check to see if you're related to other people.
mm-hmm. And that's very handy to have that magical book of saying you're related to this person. Y'all
I have other
probably
things
shouldn't
too.
be.
Yeah, I have other
Yeah.
things too. Like there's in as my world have tons. I love magic, so like I have a very defined magic system, and that's not the only way to find out who you're related to. Like any healer can tell you, as long as you're like
Hmm.
in the same room with someone you're related with, they can sense the
Mm-hmm.
blood relationship if someone you're blood
Oh,
related
that's
to
really cool.
within a certain number of degrees. We haven't tested it beyond like half brothers, cousins. I haven't found people who are beyond those degrees to see how far out that would work. So,
So like it
also
almost like a magical DNA or not DNA test, but yeah, a magical DNA test.
well, that's what like healing magic is. You're fixing the
Mm-hmm.
body. So like in the
Okay.
magic system that I created, like if you're like fixing the body and then like you would be able to actually a blood witch would also be able to sense a degree of relationship because
That's really cool.
it's yeah, it's because that's how they figure it out in our world. They test your blood.
Yeah.
You do a blood test to see if you're related. So I just thought about it in those terms. Like if you're like stopping people bleeding with magic, then why wouldn't your magic be able to tell you if something is related? It's the same thing like a stone mage like wandering past a mountain and the magic tells it is X% this stone, Y% that stone. And hey, if you need some iron, there's some iron there. Want some gold?
Yeah.
Like it's kind of the same thing. Like, why? So I was like, oh, that makes sense. Like, why wouldn't it be able to tell you that? I just got to get a freaking healer there so that so you can find out that his own father indentured him. So, um, not
Like
really a
A
spoiler.
magical Jerry Springer.
It's not really a spoiler because like the few interactions he's had, the guy has gone to extreme lengths to make it impossible for him to see his face.
Mm-hmm.
There's only one logical reason why you would do that. Either you're disfigured and you don't
Yeah.
want people to see it, which he's not disfigured. And or you look like someone who happens to be in the same room who doesn't know that you guys are related.
Yeah.
So and I
I would
think
love to read that scene where like a healer comes in and is like, um, you are the father. So like, yeah,
I've written
magical Jerry
it, but
Springer.
I haven't been able to put it in anywhere. The father also spends a lot of time in another city because he's part of the ruling council of the country, so he's not around a whole lot for my character to run into. Um, and he's indentured, so he's a much lower class. And
Yeah.
his father's on the ruling council. He's a nobleman, so I mean they're not going to mix.
Yeah.
I'm trying to arrange that, but they're not cooperating. Like neither character is cooperating with this plan. So like I've written the
They don't want to
scene.
meet each other.
No, like at this point, I'm like, are we gonna do a deathbed confession? Is that where we're headed to? Because like y'all are not letting me get this in while you're alive, so we can do the Jerry Springer like magic edition. You know, I mean, maybe they want to be extra Jerry Springer and have it be the deathbed confession. Like I'm trying, but they're not cooperating. So you know,
That's when you pull a Deus Machina, and you're
nah,
just
I
like,
don't.
I am the god of your world. Boop.
Well, I mean, we had his the main character. We had Sarn's sister, who's deceased, run into a guy who looked exactly like her and her twin brother, and she was like, "Wait, but this person is older than them, like by 7 or 8 years. Like it's obvious that this person is much older than them." And she's like, why do you look like I'm confused. She's like, I have two brothers, one who looks like me, one who's a half brother who doesn't really look like us much. Who are you? You know? And like this other person doesn't know that he has other half siblings that he's not aware of. So he's like, I don't know. Who do you think I am? It's then they get involved in because like the villain was like taken over and she got involved in the whole thing and was like, okay, I'm gonna find you later and find the answer. She hasn't yet, but this is my Cursebreaker series and its sister series, his Angelic Keeper series. That the scene with the half brother was in. I think it was his Angelic Keeper Fallen. Yeah. So, but the scenes where like Sarn interacted with his actual father, which he didn't know, was actually in the first book. The guy was like in the shadows and like trying really hard to keep him from seeing him. He wasn't suspicious because he was like in the middle of something else and they pulled him in to talk to his mind. So unfortunately, Sarn was very much not thinking about the whole like, why are you keeping me from seeing you? And Sarn's eyes glow. So trying to keep, so he's in the shadows behind the screen, like trying to keep. It's not easy to stay in, to keep it so that you're not visible when somebody's eyes glow very brightly. So it's like I find the scene to be kind of hilarious. It's not written that way. It's a very serious scene, but I don't know. It tickles my funny
At the
bone.
same time, yeah, sometimes you have
I know.
serious scenes that are absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, but yeah. So he needs the Book of Names, which he wouldn't be able to see as a lower class person, and he needs a healer. We don't currently have one. We have people who don't have healing magic who heal people with like just stitching them up and hoping for the best. At the moment they don't, because magic is illegal, so finding a healer with magic, they exist. I have a couple, but getting them to go there into the city that's in the capital region where it's more likely that you'll interact with like one of the group that goes around hunting magic users is a lot higher. It's a little bit harder to convince a healer to go there with that actually has magic. I'm working on it, but the character keeps like deciding not to go there. It's like, stay in the hinterlands
I like
where it's easier to hide. So we got the job it's on the job board, but like nobody's applying.
Exactly. Sometimes the characters are just like, no, I'm not doing that. I've had a few characters who do that where I'm just like, you're supposed to do this. How does this work? And they're like, no, that's not going to happen. I'm like, but it would make for a good story. And they're like, it's not going to happen. Like, fine. For other characters where I'm just like, this is not supposed to happen. They're like, I don't care. This is what happens. Yeah, I'm like, but this is very awkward, and I don't know how to write it as a author. And they're like, well, that's where you have to improve your craft so you can write this story one day. And I'm just like, I don't know if that's how it works, but okay, fine.
I've had the same arguments, like, or you're trying to wrap up the book, and in the in the last freaking at the very end of the book, character's like, I'm gonna run off and do this thing over here. Like, no, the book is done. I'm sorry, but then it's like this thing is kind of neat, and okay, now I'm gonna have to change what we were going to be doing in the sequel to this cool thing you started running off and doing that you weren't supposed to be doing because it's interesting, and now I'm curious.
Yes.
And they always do this to me. There's a couple of events that like I've been trying to get to that like I mentioned years ago and I still can't get to because the characters just won't do it. They're like, no, we're gonna go chase dragons. No, I need you to do the freaking joust because I've been promising this for years. I need you to just do the damn joust. Let's go to the joust. Let's fight the monsters. Let's save the queen. Let's stop running around doing other things, please.
They're just like Henry. They don't want to have responsibility anymore. They just want to be fun adventurers who, save the day.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what Henry does a lot. Is he's like, I don't want to be responsible. I don't care if my parents were like the children of rulers of countries and accidentally caused a war. I just want to go fight bad guys and swing a sword around and be Leroy Jenkins.
Oh,
I don't know if you've seen
dragons.
That. Yeah.
We're just chasing dragons. What are you gonna do with the dragons when you catch them? No plan. Nothing. Oh, you'll figure something. Yeah, I'm gonna figure something out when you've wandered so far off the outline that like you're off in Guam. I don't know what you're doing.
Oh, it's always fun when characters misbehave.
Yeah, and then like I have a somewhat large cast, so there's more of them, so their ability to misbehave and rebel is a little higher than there's too many of them.
I've been able to, most of my characters are well behaved. I do have one character from a short story that I'm writing now that's within the Loishara world. Once again, it's one of those I love doing a different point of view.
Yeah.
So in book 2, Ina is trying to return back to the Thane estate. It's been attacked, everything. And she's hiding in the woods trying to get some intelligence on the invaders. And there's a point where she accidentally like steps on I can't remember if it's her or the person she's with, steps on a branch and makes a sound, and then like this camp of guards, all of a sudden they hear it, and she's like, oh shit, be very, very silent. And then they go back to doing whatever they were doing, which was mostly arguing. But the short story that I'm writing now, the main character is in that camp and he sees Ina and her friend staring out from the bushes. But at this point, he's so disillusioned and pissed off with fighting and the leadership of the invaders and all that kind of stuff that he's just like, you know what? I'm not going to say anything.
I didn't see nothing.
I didn't see nothing. And not only that, but he also ends up helping some of her friends who are still in the estate. And so I was like, okay, this is going to be a cool little side story about a character. But other than him seeing Ina that one night, they're never going to interact again. And he's like, no, I'm going to end up with one of Ina's daughters. And I'm like, how is that going to happen now? And he's like, well,
yeah, like she doesn't have any daughters yet.
So he's like, so I get frozen. And I'm like, what? I was like, how does that work? Please enlighten me as to how you're getting frozen. He's like,
and why?
Solo. And I'm like,
yeah, like who's freezing you and why would they do that? Are you somebody important?
His old boss. Well, kind of. So one of the head people of the invasion does not like this main character. And because of elven culture dynamics and all that kind of stuff. And so this one of the leaders, as soon as it's revealed that this main character is now helping Ina's friends and actively trying to not help the people he came over with, that he's kind of turned coat. this guy's like, I'm not going to kill you. I am going to use ice magic to freeze you in like almost permanently, semi-permanently, so that basically that's considered a form of torture in their culture, and that's a fate worse than death. And so
Now
he
you need
gets
someone to break
basically,
the spell, which
oh yes,
means
oh there's going to be some. So what's going to end up happening is he has a half, or not half sister, he has a twin sister who's on the boat alongside, coming over on invasion. But as soon as they get to Svartån, why do I keep calling her his half sister? Not his half sister, his twin sister. They're half elves, or they are half Asilis elves, half Linville elves. That's where I'm getting the half from. But his twin sister basically is like, screw y'all. I'm doing my own thing. And he's like, but wait, he's like, what if you get hurt? And she's like, I don't care. I don't care. These people, like, the Asilis elves have treated us like garbage. You just haven't realized it yet. Our family has treated us like garbage. You just haven't realized it yet. And during the story, he realizes that this thing that he's been wanting, he's not going to get it. And so that's where he gets disillusioned, and he's like, screw it. I'm done. And so he, after, when the leadership, Amon is the name of the elf, he freezes the main character in sort of a Han Solo-ish kind of way, where he's just like, not necessarily in a block of ice, but pretty much frozen in something. And the main character's sister finds him, along with a friend that she has made, who ends up being a river dragon. And between her and the river dragon have become very quick friends. And part of that is because Cephas itself has told the river dragon, you need to protect this girl. And I have a whole other story on that in my head that needs to be written. But
there's always another story.
There's always another story. And that's why I could be writing 100 stories in this world and not be done.
I could too. I'm running a side story that is becoming a trilogy, because they won't do the one thing they promised they would do in this.
Exactly.
Damn you, because I need that one thing to figure out something in another book, in another series, that readers are actually waiting for. And I'm like, just one thing I asked of you. You can't give me the one thing.
Exactly. No, and that's with this character. After he gets frozen, his sister and the dragon basically take his frozen body to a place to I guess thaw out, magically thaw out, but it takes about 20 years for this to happen.
Yes.
And so he wakes up 20 years later, and he has no memory that the last 20 years has passed. He has no, like, he looks like he did when he got frozen. Mentally, he's still there. Like, time has not passed for him. And that's part of the reason why this freezing curse is kind of a fate worse than death, because everyone around you, even if you're a long-living elf, everyone around you will age and grow. And by the time you are like the curse is done, everyone around you is dead, just from aging, from time passing, and you are stuck. And so, but for him, he ends up being stuck for about 20 years. When he wakes up, he sees his sister, and he's like, what happened to you? And she's like, well, it's been 20 years. Not what happened to me. What happened to you?
Yeah, why were you frozen? What did you do? Who did you piss off?
You pissed off the Asilis leaders, and that this is what happened to you. And so then he's like, oh crap, what do I do now? Like, I had no idea when we came over here what plan B was. I just knew I was going to hang out with you. And also, in the 20 years that's happened, his sister and the dragon guy are now in a relationship. They're partners. They have a family, all that kind of stuff. And so he's just sort of like, kind of like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And so he goes adventuring. He's like, you know what? I got nothing to lose.
I'm gonna
And
go
so
find something.
yes, and he does, however, kind of stay along the coastline, and he doesn't mess too much with the humans because he's pretty sure he's like, if anyone sees me, I still look like an Acilis elf. There's still a lot of bad blood. They're gonna kill me. But he goes and he just tries to just generally help people because he's like, I don't have anything better to do. And they're pirates and they're other, entities. And so at one point, he ends up meeting up with Maddie's kids, because once again, this is like 20 years in the future. And he becomes friends with them. And he knows on a couple occasions he's interacted with Maddie and her husband, who he
Mhm.
also knows because they're all part of the same friend group, family group. Um, and then Ina's daughter, her oldest daughter, has decided I'm going to be an adventurer instead of a princess. Like I don't want to deal with royal stuff. I want to go fight shit. And so she's seeing, you know, Maddie and her family and hanging out with her cousins, and they end up she gets separated from her cousins and then gets into a bit of a brawl with some of these pirates, um, and gets in over her head, to which um, Kyrion, who is the Acilis main character, ends up helping her and rescuing her. And she's all like, she sees him and she's like, "You're hot. I like you. I want
Aw.
to be around you more." And he's all like, "Mm, bad news, bad news, bad." Like he sees her
Not
and he
ready for
sees,
that. He just got unthawed.
yeah.
Needs
Well,
a little bit of time
it's been
to
a couple of
live.
years. It's been a couple of years that he's been playing, that he's been since he's been unthawed. But at the same time, uh, he's like, I realized that even though I was frozen for those 20 years, and even though, yes, I look and mentally I'm kind of your peer, on the other hand, there is still that 20-year gap. And he's like,
Yeah.
I don't want this to be weird. But Ina's daughter's like, I don't care if it's weird or not. I like you. And
I
so
mean,
that's
it would
where,
just be weird for him, not really for her. I could understand. I could
yeah.
understand it not being weird for her at all, and she'd be like, "So
But
if you're from somewhere else, you have
even
different
after he,
experiences anyway."
yeah. And even after he explains, look, I was frozen for 20 years. Technically, I was born like 40 years ago. I'm I'm your mother's peer. I was born around the time that your mother was. Uh yeah, Ina's daughter's like, I don't care. I still like you. And he's just like, the first, I figure there's probably going to be a few books of this, but he's just like, um he's like, I just need to be really nice and be, slow, and slowly let her, like, you know, if I ignore her enough and just like keep this platonic, then, she'll just go away. She'll move on from me. Like, and no, that doesn't happen. And when I was talking to these two characters, I'm just like, really? Like this, I did not want a Twilight situation where you have a much older dude
Yeah.
with a much younger, and they're just like, we don't care. Actually, Ina's daughter's the one who doesn't care. She's like, I'm gonna do my own thing. And I'm like, fine. We'll
Sometimes
figure
you
out
just
how to
have
make this not weird.
Yeah, sometimes you just have to let it go and just let them do their thing. So, all right. So we've been talking for a long while. So, Heir of
Yes.
Svartån is the first book in the series, the Loishara. I got it. I got it.
Yes.
Loishara series. How many other books are currently published?
Let's see. Can you hear me?
You're a little low.
Sorry, I'm having some
That's
technical
better.
difficulties.
So we'll
Yeah.
wrap it up, but since your tech is having
My
is starting to.
headphones decided to die, but they're not quite dead. So I'm gonna put them away. But yeah, um, you've been introduced to the vortex. I tend to talk
That's
on and on
okay.
about a lot of stuff. I have fun with this.
No,
So
it was a really enjoyable conversation. I just want to make sure that we hit like a couple of points before we end off. So I think I saw there were 6 books in the Louis Shara series on your website.
so uh there are 5 main books in the series.
Okay.
Those are the full length that range anywhere from 78 to 90,000 words. Those are the
full-length novels. And then I have a whole bunch of like novellas. So I have one novella which is the prequel to the series, and that's the one that I've kind of been using as a reader magnet, a freebie for people who want to kind of check out Lois Shara, see if they like the style, that kind of stuff. They like the world. That's Visions of Lois Shara, and that's if someone joins my newsletter, that's the story that they're going to get. And
Mhm.
then I have another novella that was originally, and technically it's still on Vella. I've kind of not been doing too much with Vella anymore. I got burned out by that. But I got a bunch of great short or not short stories, novellas out of that. And the first one that I wrote on there, which was just sort of a fun, I want to explore the history and lore of Lois Shara, and this is one of their heroes. And I was like, what is his coming of age story? And so I wrote that, and then last year I published that in ebook. So it's an ebook and paperback, and it's still technically on Vella, but I've kind of been ignoring that one. But uh, those are the books that are published so far. So 5 full-length novels and then 2 uh, novellas that are that are like on ebook, paperback. Well, ebook, because Visions of Lois Shara isn't on paperback. It's confusing. I apologize.
No, it makes sense. We've got, and then are you working on another book in the series right now?
Yeah, multiple. So, um, so I have planned. My goal for next year is to write 4 full-length novels. Um, I have one in a time traveling series that doesn't have anything to do with Lois Shara, and then I'm going to start on a trilogy concerning Ina's friend Henry, who you meet in books 4 and 5, because he's a fun character too. And um, my goal is to have that trilogy started next March, to publish that next March. We will see. We will see how chaotic my life is
Yeah.
for the rest of this year, but that is my goal. And I also have what I'm also doing is um, I have a bunch of novellas from Lois Shara that I wrote last year. I'm writing this year. Like I said, there's a story with the Asylas character, the elf, that I'm working on right now. And then I also have a short story that I plan to write concerning Maddie and her arrival into Lois Shara. And those stories, I'm moving away from Vella and putting them on my subscription site on
Mhm.
Ream. And so people who, if they read the Lois Sharon Chronicles, if they read Ina's series and they're like, I love this, I want more, that's where I'm going to be posting um, both stories that were originally on Vella. They're going to be going on to Ream eventually, and then any new stuff in the Lois Shara uh, universe is going to first be on my subscription site, which is called the Book Horde. It is not spelled BOOK Horde, um, but that's where all of my new stuff is going to go before it ends up being an ebook and paperback format.
Oh,
I
makes
think I
sense.
answered your question.
No, that totally makes sense. All my new stuff is on Patreon and then it goes out into the world. So I
Yeah,
totally get it. But
so
no,
that's what I'm doing.
this has been awesome. And there's plenty of books to go out there and check out. So
Mhm.
sign up
And
for the newsletter for that pre Visions of Lois Shara
yep,
prequel. Yeah.
yep. And then I think I was mentioning this before we started. In September, I am starting my first Kickstarter, and that's going to be for one of the other novellas in the Lois Shara series or Lois Shara world universe. Um, and we will see how that goes. I'm excited for that.
Yeah, I'm thinking about September for a Kickstarter run too. So
Yeah.
maybe we'll be swapping the whole backer thing
Oh,
or
I'm excited because I've seen a lot of um uh I've seen a lot of people do really well uh on Kickstarter, and part of me is like, with the cost of everything going up, I'm like, I need help with keeping my uh like paying for my editor and my cover artist and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, so it looks like Kickstarter has a lot of potential for that. So I'm excited.
Yeah. I want us to get on there and start building a sort of a following, because I have wanted to do a graphic novel for like years
Yes.
on like some of my books are just so visual that
Mhm.
I think that they would make I think they'd be really neat to translate them into like a graphic novel, but
Yes.
that's something that you need to know that you're going to have enough people wanting it
Mhm.
to that you know, to cover the print run and everything. So that's
Yeah.
like one of my main reasons for getting on for doing Kickstarter, is just to start like with the first one I'm gonna need to learn.
Yeah.
Obviously, I learn how this works and
Yes.
start building up some kind of like a following, and I would I really do want to do like the graphic novels, because I really feel like the Kurtzberger series especially like lends itself to that.
Oh, yeah,
Like
totally.
Sarn is such a visual, his magic is so visual. I
Mhm.
think it would be like really amazing to have an artist capture that. Yeah, but
If you
that's
if you if you figure that out, I would love to hear experiences, because yeah, I love graphic novels myself, and that would be a very cool thing to do. But like you said, you have to know that there's an audience who wants that before you
That's
go
the
into it.
thing, and that's what I'd have to, and Kickstarter is into the people who back things on there, into very physical goods. There is a
Yeah.
whole comics thing on there. I actually backed one of them because it's a weird Western with like the um a really tough like female bounty hunter, and that would be one of my favorite like things. I was like, yeah, give me like, where's the tier with all of it? I want all of it. And so, yeah, so it's a big thing on their comics and stuff. And but I didn't want to like go right out the gate with that, because like I don't have an artist yet.
Yeah.
And you know, in my head I've like storyboarded some ideas for this, you know, because like I was that 13-year-old girl in the comic book shop buying comic
Yes.
books, spending my entire allowance on it. You know, I was the only girl in the comic book shop.
I know that
And
feeling well.
yeah,
Yeah.
and like nowadays you go in there and like nobody cares, but like at the time in like
It was
1993 when I was 13 years old, like I
it was
was
a girls'
getting the
club.
side eye, man. Like, or you know, and the guy behind the counter like, "Oh, are you getting this for like your brother, your cousin, your some person who is male in your life?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "No, I read them. My brother." Like, I was buying I was very into Marvel and Image
Mhm.
comics and some Dark Horse. My brother was very into DC. So between us, we had all the comics. You know, so he bought Superman and Batman, and I bought the X-Men and other titles. And
Nice.
we
Yeah.
saw,
No,
and when he was at school, I read his comics, and probably when I was at school, he read mine.
exactly. Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
I I completely feel that, because
But
I
like,
wasn't so much into DC and Marvel, but there's other stuff. There's a ton of
I
different.
loved the Wildcats, just the
Mhm.
diversity of characters in there, from the really short dude to like the very tall, statuesque, you know, and hair of all different colors, and like nice characters and really bitchy characters. Like I
Mhm.
liked that there was the whole like gamut of personalities and backgrounds, and that they're fighting aliens, not other like people. They're
Yeah.
fighting aliens. Literal aliens. And yeah, and like I just always like, even like, because like the Chris Burger series, like this was like like not specifically Star Story, but like the world, like it when I was really really little, like
Mhm.
that's what I was like playing with, like toys in like the like building out that world. And
Oh, yeah.
like there's different characters. Then I'll eventually get to those characters in the future, but and like I always imagine when I was buying, you know, at the comic store picking up comics, like a comic that was set in the world that I'd created with, you know,
Oh, yeah,
it was
absolutely.
just something I've always wanted. So
Oh, well, hopefully I'm excited. Now I'm gonna have to go out and I haven't had the.
you have an artist like sister. Like
Yes.
I'd be starting from like like
I
absolute scratch with that. But I need to build up the following because like that's a really expensive. There's a lot of outlay, and like I do want to hire an actual artist, and like
yeah,
I don't want to pay them. I don't want to have to pay them poverty wages because I was reading some
exactly.
articles about this
Yeah.
one artist who passed away and from overwork. He was in his
Mhm.
40s.
Yeah.
And like just reading about how like like all these people, there was like a hashtag about like how the comics industry destroyed them
Yeah.
physically because they're getting paid such little amount for insane amounts of work, So I wouldn't do it unless I could figure out how to do it like
Yeah.
so that A, I'm not like deep in debt, and B, that like they're actually getting like some kind of good compensation for
Oh,
it.
yeah.
So there's like a lot of like research and whatever that have to go into it. But first I'd have to know that I could get enough
Mhm.
backers to be able to even do this. So I thought I'd start with like what I have, books,
Yes, exactly.
and go from there and see if we can get because if the campaigns build up to be big enough, then it's like, okay, like if I get like a campaign, I guess it's like in the like, I don't know, like maybe 50,000 or something like for like a
Mhm.
regular book. And it's like, okay, we might be able to get enough funding because I think that's what you would need is like
Yeah.
$50,000 or something or $20,000. Like I'm not even
Yeah.
sure. But like not like a couple of $1,000s. I don't think that would be enough to do like a graphic novel of it, or maybe I'd probably have to break it up into like I don't know that I'd be able to do like the whole
Yeah.
book because it's 165,000 words
Yeah.
as like one graphic novel. Like I think it would have to be done in like I
I
have so
wonder.
many questions.
Yeah. No, I'm thinking of like because along with a lot of the like comic books and graphic novels, I also got into a lot of manga,
Well,
and
I mean, there's that too.
they figured out a way to basically you have this big overarching story, um, and one of my favorites is called The Library Wars, but, the way that the author I don't know if it's both the author and illustrator, but the way that they set up the stories is that this thing is a massive story in of itself, but they were able to chunk it up into, bite-size
Right.
pieces, and but those pieces had their own story arcs within them, and I'd love to be able to do something like that. I don't have I'm like,
Yeah,
one day
I'm
maybe.
pretty far from being able to do that. Like this is still pie in the sky, and
Yeah.
other pie
Oh,
in
oh,
the sky is
absolutely.
getting my favorite narrator to narrate the audiobook, but that's
Exactly.
very pie in the sky for 165,000 word novel, and be looking
Yeah.
at like let's see, a lot.
I
Like
I've
that's
had a lot of
17 or 18
people.
hours, and
Yeah.
the narrators that I like that have narrated my favorite books on Audible are $500 an hour and up.
Yeah.
So like we're looking at a really humongous like outlay. So
I've
like this
I've
is
had people
all
ask.
horizon.
Yeah, I've had people ask about, doing audiobooks for the Lois Sharon Chronicles, and I've had to tell them it's going to be a minimum of 15 grand for the entire series, like a minimum.
Yeah.
So, if you guys want them, please go buy the,
I
ebook
think
and paperback and, like, you know, get get people interested because, like, I'm not a person who can shell out 15 grand as much as I love the series, you know, a minimum of 15 grand to pay for an audiobook version of this. So,
I think
and
I'm
that's
looking
something I
at
don't think a lot of
100
readers.
grand to do mine.
What?
I think I'm
Oh,
looking at 100 grand to do mine because there's over 1 million words in just the
oh,
Chris Bigger
wow.
series alone, and it
Yeah.
has
Oh, yeah.
offshoots. So I think I'm looking at like at least 100 grand to do all of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think a lot of readers I mean, I didn't know this until I started, researching audio books and that kind of stuff. I don't think there's a lot of readers who understand like, know how expensive it is. And, you know, it's something like I said, it's something I didn't
Mm.
know until recently, so
Yeah, I was looking into like other options, but if I do the royalty share, then I can't continue to read some of it on the podcast, and I can't include excerpts of it in the podcast, and I
yeah.
don't. So I'm looking at the only option to be able to keep doing things with it in on the podcast is to not do royalty share, but to completely buy it out. And I'd rather do that because then the artist gets paid like up front, which
Yes.
I think is more fair. It's just very expensive.
Yeah.
So it's not something I'm gonna be able to do soon. Well, I don't know. That's why I want to try Kickstarter, because
Sure. Yeah.
maybe like the audiobook could be like a stretch goal or something. I don't know.
That's
And maybe
that's what I'm kind of thinking is I'm uh and I'm starting with the fact that the story that I'm using on that I'm doing the Kickstarter for is a novella, so it's a shorter tale. Um, but I'm thinking of having that as one of the stretch goals. Is like, okay, if we hit X amount of money, then you know people will get the audiobook version of this as well as whatever they signed up for, so or whatever they backed.
yeah. But that's because everything is part of like a giant series. I wouldn't be
Yes.
able to do like just one, like, or I'd have to lock somebody in and like have other Kickstarters. I this is a down the road kind of a
Yes.
situation. I first need to like try Kickstarter and see like, you know, because it's
Yeah.
not easy putting together a campaign, like,
Oh no.
one, especially one that will do well.
Yeah.
Um, and by do well, I mean just at least fund.
Yeah.
That's the floor. That's the floor. Like, it needs to at least fund. Otherwise, nothing happens. Nothing gets
Yeah.
made. Nobody gets charged. So, yeah, I'm trying to figure it all out.
Same here. That's why I've been reading as much as I can and seeing what other people are doing with their Kickstarters, just so that, when I do mine, that uh it will fund, hopefully. I
Yeah,
think it will. I think, you know, based off of, the research and everything that I've done,
right.
that, people will get the stuff that they want, all that kind of stuff. So I'm excited to do it. Um, and if it goes really well, then I'm like, okay, then I can expand and figure out other things to do and how to build on that. But it's that first one.
That's it. That's it. You got to get over that first one. So, um, to be continued on that, because
Exactly.
we're nowhere near ready to announce that or share anything about that, except that it's something on the horizon that we're working on, and
Yeah,
hopefully we'll
I'm
have.
I've decided I want to have mine launch on September 15th. That is my goal.
Hmm.
Um, we will see. Um, I'm almost at the point um of saying, okay, doing the pre-launch and saying, okay, it is September 15th, but um once again, because this is my first one, I don't know how, all the back end stuff. I've got to be sure of the back end stuff
Yeah,
before.
that's what I'm working on. Like,
Yeah.
getting the new covers, getting the dust jackets, because I don't have dust jackets for
Yeah.
anything at all. Because you know it's Amazon doesn't offer dust jackets, so I never got the dust jacket for any of the. So going back and trying to get dust covers, especially some of the designers that have worked on the series, they're not designing anymore. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
um, not gonna. This is not a recover thing for everything, just certain things. But yeah, it's definitely a thing that I'm figuring out. So like you, like, I need to have when I want to be all set up, so when the Kickstarter ends and the funds are collected and the surveys come back, I can
Go. Yeah.
just immediately start deploying rewards.
Mhm.
Immediate, like,
'Cause
everything is
that's a big
written.
thing, like, for me, as because I've backed a bunch of campaigns on Kickstarter, and I wanna be the kind of person that when I do, a Kickstarter, that anyone who backs me, as soon as I fund, as soon as the
Same.
campaign ends, they'll start getting the stuff almost immediately. They won't have to wait.
That's it, because like I've backed a few campaigns where like they've ended now, like, one of them like a month or so about a month ago, and like the last update was that they've been working a lot, they haven't been able to get the stuff finished, and I was like, I don't want to be that person. It's the first Kickstarter that I'm doing. I don't want to be that
Yeah.
person. I want to be able to immediately send everything out through BookFunnel for the digital stuff, put in the orders with Book Vault for the physical stuff, so that within I think it's about 3 or 4 weeks from when it ends, like the physical book will be like in your mailbox type of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's only because like the printer itself takes, like
That
about
3 to 4 weeks.
it,
Yeah.
it takes about like 5 to 9 days to print it, because you go into
Yeah.
a queue, and then it's about 2 weeks for us in the US, because the printer
Yeah.
is in the UK. It's about 2 weeks for me to get a copy. Like people who are in the UK or in Europe will probably get it sooner.
Yeah.
But and if you're elsewhere in the world, I'm not entirely sure, but how long it'll take for you to get it. But and I want to track everything. I know that tracked shipping is a little more expensive, but I need to know
Yeah.
that the book babies made it to their
Exactly.
destination.
No,
you know?
there have been a few Kickstarters that I've backed where, like, I trust that I'm going to get the stuff from them, but the Kickstarter person has said, okay, I'm not putting tracking on this because it costs more money. And I'm like, I'm like, I would have paid more money for the
Yeah.
tracking.
Yeah.
So I like that is something that's also like, think about shipping and everything. When I am, figuring out what the shipping is for what shipping I'm going to charge, I'm going to say, okay, I got to figure out how much tracking is going to be. Because I know for my peace of mind, I want to make sure that my
Yeah.
book babies get there. And
That's
also for the person who's backing it.
Yep, I've been doing all the pricing as including the tracking,
Yeah.
and trying to build into the tier as much shipping as possible. So if there has to be an extra, so that like if people are like in some in Australia or somewhere else, that they're only
Mhm.
paying a small fee above that if there's anything extra. And I want everyone's to be tracked so that I know that the book gets to it, even if it's a little more expensive, because I need to know that my baby reached you, that you
Yeah.
are that when it was sent out, that you received it, it is in your hands. I need that.
Yeah.
Like,
Or if there's a problem, I can say, this is what I'm seeing on my end. Because I know for myself, the post office where I'm at, notoriously bad. Like I actually had a Kickstarter. They sent me the stuff that I backed, the tier that I backed, and my post office dropped it off at someone else's house. And this was actually a more expensive Kickstarter that I'd backed. Um, and it was coming from Australia. And so I got the package, but I saw noted on there, it's like, this is not the right address. The address that's on this bag is the right address. You need to take it to this person's house. Like they wrote a note to the post office and then it came to my house. But I'm just like,
okay.
oh, in case there are people who back my Kickstarter who have post office locations like my own that don't really do a good job of sending the mail to where it's supposed to be. I want to be able to say, okay, here on my tracking thing, this is where it says it's supposed to be. And if it's the post office that messed up, um, I can say, go talk to the post office, go yell at them. I've done that plenty of times. Like I said, the post office where I live, they tend to mess up stuff a lot, especially international orders. Um, but then I can tell the person, okay, this is where the hang up may have been. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
my personal, like, I want a
Yeah.
high level of like quality for the customer.
Yeah, like if you don't track it, then you don't know. Like, because somebody could be like, "Hey, I didn't get it yet," and you can check the tracking, like, "Oh, the shipping is taking a little longer than normal, but I see that it's actually heading to you." Instead of if it's not tracked, you just have no information. I
Exactly.
and I get it. People want to save money; they want to maximize their profit. Like, I want to make sure that things get where they're supposed to go.
Exactly, because the other thing is I know that there have been a few Kickstarters where I've backed multiple Kickstarters from the same person or same company because I realize uh, that they are actually a quality company or quality. Um, I don't want to say individual, but like I know that if I back their Kickstarter, I will get the products that I that I want. And so what I would love, absolutely love, is I do a Kickstarter. Someone's like, I had a great experience backing their stuff. I love their stuff. And now I have a new fan or super fan,
Yeah.
as opposed to someone who's like, oh, well, I like their stuff, but I had a crappy experience with Kickstarter, so I'm not going to buy anything from them.
Yeah, there were some horror stories about doing the personalization through Ingram and like the wrong
Oh yeah.
personalization going to the wrong person and trying to sort that out. Like,
Ingram Spark scares me sometimes.
that's why I'm using Book Vault.
Yeah, I'm now that Book Vault has started to have like US stuff. Like I
Not
think they
for
have
dust jackets.
not for dust jackets. Okay.
Not for my
Yeah.
book size, which is 9x6 because it's an omnibus, so I need
Mhm.
all the space I can get. They don't have it there. All my books are 9x6, so I don't know if they don't have dust jackets, period.
Mhm.
Or if it's just for that size. But yeah, all of mine say they're still gonna be printed in the UK. So
Okay. But yeah,
it
I'm
is
actually
what it
kind of
is.
curious. Like I'm like, I would rather deal with Amazon than Ingram Spark because of all the
Yeah.
horror stories I've heard. But I may have to look into Book Vault because now, especially that they have printers in the US, um, I'm hoping that like with a simple order that wouldn't be too much of an issue.
I've never had an issue. I've ordered 4 books from Book Vault and
Mhm.
they were printed in the UK, shipped over. I got them. I put the order in and it's about 3 weeks from when I put the order in, I got it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to check them out because yeah, that's
And they're beautiful.
I'll have to yeah. Okay. That kind of seals deal.
And
I need to check them
that's why
out.
I wanna use them for the Kickstarter because they're really beautiful. Like, I mean, they're not it's not leather, they're not like, sprayed edges or anything, but the colors are really rich
Mhm.
and the paper feels nice and, like, it feels very sturdy, the hardcover.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
And so, like, and for if it's in for an omnibus, which is going to be 800 to 900 pages, because I refuse to make the font super tiny and I refuse to make the line spacing between the lines on the page to be super like tiny.
Yeah.
There's space. The text can breathe. It's easy on the eyes. Yeah, I don't want to squash everything in and make it impossible to read. I actually want people to read it. So,
Oh, yeah.
I wanted something sturdy. And this is. It's not super heavy either, which like I was happy about. I was a little bit afraid. I was like, this is kind of long. But it's 3 books, and it's about like 300 almost 400,000 words
Mhm.
in it. So I mean, that's not an insignificant chunk of text.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's all to be continued. Not ready to reveal any of the images for it or anything. I'm still figuring this all out.
Yeah.
Getting everything set up. And yeah, that's all the spoilers you get, folks, today. This has been Fantasy Lore and More. I'm your host, Melinda Kucsera, and today we were talking to Laura Nelson about the Heir of Svartån. All the links will be in the description or the show notes, depending on where you're watching this. Have a great day or a great night, also depending on where you're listening or watching. We'll see you in the next episode with another fantasy author and another book.